Welcome to another edition of the Dynamic Thriving Podcast. I am your host, Mary Ann Pack, spiritual guide into all things life transformational. And today I am so pleased to have my dear friend and colleague, Lori Raggio, with me of InspireGreatnessCoaching.com. So welcome, Lori.
Hi, Mary Ann. How are you?
I'm wonderful. I am so glad you're here because this is another special edition where Lori is going to help me tell a little bit more of my story because the topic today is thriving beyond religious trauma. So I'm really excited to have her here. She's got a lot of questions lined up, and I believe we're going to split this into two parts. So this will be part one. And I think we're ready to start. Oh, but the other thing, Lori has been a guest on this podcast also, and her episode is episode 17, and it's entitled Being and Becoming a Spiritual Journey. So that will be in the show notes so that you can watch Lori's episode also. So what would you like to get started with, Lori?
Well, first of all, Mary Ann, I'd like to thank you for offering your podcast and interviewing so many amazing, incredible entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, light workers, and really supporting their message as to how they use their talents to impact the world. So knowing that this is a special episode for you and a focus on you and your journey and your business, I'm honored to be the person interviewing you. And I know that on April 1st, your podcast was focused on you and kind of a shift that you're making, not only in your business, but really in a little bit more about what you're focusing on with your journey. And so I'm wondering if you could bring us up to speed a little bit. What is that shift and how are you impacting the world?
Oh, that's a very good question. I this past several months, I have been feeling a call to talk a little bit more about my spiritual journey, my spiritual path through the church, and then leaving the church and thriving on the other side. Because I felt like there was enough healing around that those emotional stings weren't there. So it's still a very vulnerable place to come from. So it was like my last area to surrender to and say, yes, I will speak my truth.
Yeah.
I will share it with others because I know I'm not the only one with religious trauma.
Right.
I know there are probably millions of us around the world who have dealt with this and the consequences and the coping mechanism and all the symptoms that go with it. That can be misdiagnosed even in treatment. So, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But expanding this into being able to use my voice, my truth in my business now has just been very, very exciting and kind of scary at the same time.
Well, and I wanted to thank you for, again, being vulnerable and actually modeling for all of us what you give all of us an opportunity. And I think it's interesting what you said and really important for others, for your listeners to hear this. You said you've done some healing around this topic.
Right.
And it's not as perhaps difficult to talk about it.
Right.
But we're never 100% healed. And so if we were to wait until we felt like we had dealt with everything, then we're missing out on an opportunity to talk about things that are important to us and that could really impact other people.
Right. And the other thing I want to let people know is, this will have a lot of religious trauma triggers in it. So this conversation, take care. If you really suffer religious trauma, those triggers, emotionally, it's very disturbing to you, just take care that this show will be talking a lot about the symptoms and the reasons behind it, the effects, the detrimental, the damage that we suffer. The other thing, many people don't necessarily have to have been raised in the church to be experiencing trauma. There is indoctrinated beliefs trauma, which I thought of the other day. I just feel like my spirit guides led me to that phrase because it's not just, it's anytime you are indoctrinated into something that is very controlling, outside controlling, where you are not autonomous in any area of your life, even if it's one area, you have trauma in that indoctrinated belief. So this is not just religious. This could be cultural. This could be social. So, you know, it could be familial within your family, a teaching that was very strong. And this is the only way we do this in our family. And it's very controlling. So that leads to trauma.
I think that's an important distinction, Marianne, because your experience was very much around the religious trauma.
Absolutely.
But there's so many other people who might be listening to this particular podcast that maybe that's not their experience, but they might be able to relate to some of the things that you're going to be talking about.
When you start listening to symptoms,
Yes.
and you start noticing those, yet you weren't maybe raised in a church or a religion, you're going to find that, oh, you may just have some indoctrinated beliefs. Just anything that is a controlling, constrictive, you know, power struggle between your autonomous, your sovereignty, and the outside, someone else outside.
So I know that you've talked before about this moving from the religious refugee to a spiritual sovereign. And I'm wondering if you can explain that a little bit more, talk a little bit more about that and how that played out in your life.
Absolutely. And I felt like a spiritual, a religious refugee. In realizing the church was becoming very toxic to me, and seeing the overreaching power and control that it wanted to have on my life, and that I wasn't sovereign in my own life, that I couldn't make my own decisions, that all the church beliefs and even within the church told me what I could decide and what I couldn't for my life. And so when you have a ruling, you know, someone outside of you that is ruling you, you want to run from that. You've got to get away. So you become a refugee. You may have to go in hiding. You may have to leave family or friends, or because it's so toxic. And you've been held in such a tight community that to break free, sometimes you have to break free of all of those relationships, and you feel like a refugee. You feel like there's no support. And when we move into realizing who we are, that we are our own spiritual sovereign, we have the power to choose our life, to direct our life, to create our reality, and that it can be joyful, and that it can be in thriving and in peace, that I certainly didn't have within the church. It was a very conditional peace or joy according to, did I think I was being obedient and a good Christian? And then when I messed up or sinned, then I would crash again. And then I would have to build myself back up and beg for forgiveness. And it was just emotional trauma almost daily of guilt and shame and fear, lots of fear.
And so for you, Marianne, and I know that this certainly will be different for each person, but how many decades did that kind of pattern span for you?
Well, I didn't leave the church until my mid-40s.
Okay.
So, you know, even beyond that, working through this over the last, I'm 62 now. So the last several years of continuing to work on this. This is such an ongoing process of releasing and installing and releasing and installing. So yeah, it's a long time.
So I think important for your listeners to know that, again, everyone is different in how they might experience this type of trauma, but that it is an ongoing process of healing.
Mm-hmm. And there's, I know there are folks that have gone to, therapists for their anxiety or their clinical depression or, things like that, bipolar even.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, those are actually symptoms of religious trauma. So we have to, not always is just one path, because a lot of therapists don't understand religious trauma because maybe they've never experienced it.
Right.
So they don't quite get it. It's not just really well documented and known.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a while. I just have to say it takes a while. But had I had someone that had gone through it already, like me, I would have bolted forward much more quickly and with much more ease and grace and gentleness. Whereas I had to just keep pounding my head in the books, trying to figure it out, searching for answers. So
well, you actually wrote a blog on April 22nd that I thought was amazing. And I know that we're going to dig into some of what you wrote in that, but you mentioned that there's a Dr. Marlene Windle who actually termed the phrase religious trauma syndrome. Yes. And I think it was like around 2011 or 2012.
It's not been that long ago.
No. So can you talk a little bit about what is religious trauma syndrome and how were you specifically impacted?
Yeah, she talks about religious trauma being how we cope with very dogmatic, very patriarchal, typically authoritarian religions, and the damage that's caused by that indoctrination, because you're so enclosed into the society of the church. If it was anything, and she was actually raised as a missionary kid, so she came from this also. And so it's how all this doctrine affects what you think about you, what you think about the world around you. How do I deal with situations? Because you may not have ever been allowed to make decisions on your own. That was me. Decisions were always made for me because they were in protection mode. Oh, don't get too involved in the world. So you have parts missing. You have education missing, fine arts and modern art and music. There was so many, it just closes you down so tight, especially in a very, very conservative, tight-knit religion like mine was. So, there's other religions that are Christian oriented, and they're much more progressive or more free. Mine was not. Mine was very closed. Put your blinders on for fear the devil will get you, or you might get dirty with the world out there. So my reading, my studying, everything was very monitored. My clothing, my TV, the music we listen to, all of that is very, very monitored, very sheltered. You feel very sheltered because you don't function in society. Like friends that listen to certain music. I was raised in the 60s and 70s. Rock music was in full swing, and I didn't know even a fraction of the music that my friends listened to. Even church friends, because they had more freedom than I had. So it's very much, it's very pervasive.
And so when you read her information about all the different ways that people are impacted, What was your first reaction?
Well, I had already heard the term religious
Yeah.
trauma syndrome. I didn't know who had come up with it until a friend actually gave me her name and I came across her website. So I started ravenously reading and watching some of her videos and trainings, and I'm going, oh my gosh. It was just like boom, 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 boom. Every symptom she said is like I had something going on in each category. So, her categories of trauma are cognitive, how we think,
Mhm.
decision making, the black and white, the perfectionism, stuff like that. The emotional is,
Mhm.
the depression, the anxiety, things like that. Um, the social, we're not as good. We feel awkward. We feel like a fish out of water because we just seem not to fit in to our social groups. Cultural, there's always, family issues that might blow up, or, so, and then there's the gaps, those gaps in our education because we've been so sheltered.
Mm.
And I would add one more because this was huge for me, is our physical health. It affects
Mm.
our physical health because that was my bing, bing, bing. I'm in deep trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if, your listeners would go and do some more research on our Dr. Wendell's information,
Mhm.
I mean, do they need to be able to identify with all of those to say that they have been impacted by this same type of trauma?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, you might get away with just one or two of those areas that you were affected. It was like, well, that was probably more reinforced in your home, whereas my home was, I was indoctrinated in all of the categories. So they
Okay.
affected me, and I was much, again, you're much more closed in, you're much more sheltered. And
Mhm.
that's the way even Dr. Marlene talks about, she said, you're just in this sphere. The child is raised in this sphere that's very closed to outside influence,
Okay.
So it's, you certainly don't have to, you may just have clinical depression
Right.
that actually stems from some other trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Just
so
go
would
back
you
and
say
look.
that women are experience this type of, religious trauma differently than men?
Uh, I would say yes, because even from the very beginning in Genesis, it's the woman's fault. It's Eve's fault that she ate of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yet the Lord didn't give her that message. It was her husband, because she hadn't even been created yet when that commandment was given. So it was her husband's responsibility to fill her in, which she understood, according to the way the scripture pans out. But after that was created, then, with the threat of God says, don't eat this fruit or you'll surely die on the day you do it. And when that happened, yet it says Adam was right there and participated. So he was the one who received the instructions, but yet it all fell on her. So just knowing that, being told over and over again that it's the woman's fault that there's original sin, that now we suffer in childbirth because that was our curse, that the Lord would increase our suffering, and in childbirth we would bear pain, and that the man would rule the woman. Genesis 3.
Mm.
So immediately, you are no longer sovereign. You no longer have a voice. You no longer can speak up for your desires or your wishes or your wants. You're told to be submissive first to your father and then to your husband. You're told you have no authority in the church over men. You are to be silent. So all of these just runs through the whole, and I was indoctrinated very strongly on every count of those. So to come back out of that
Yeah.
and start using your voice and
Yeah.
speaking your truth is just amazing. It's just so thrilling to be able to do that and have the freedom and the sovereignty and the autonomy that I can speak up for me.
And so how did you start to do that, Marianne? I mean, how did you find your voice? How did you start to use your voice? How do you use your voice today?
Um, I will say in my first marriage, I was trying my hardest to be what I was taught to be. Being a submissive wife was not real easy for me to do. I just didn't seem to get along with that rule. And then not being able to speak up for my desires because I was supposed to be in servitude to my family. My family came first over any desire that I had. So I could never ask for what I wanted. It was very frowned upon because even as a child, if I asked for something, I was told no, no, it's against our religion. We don't do that. That's not for nice little girls. So I was told no all the time. I think that was one of the biggest words in my vocabulary of understanding when I was a kid. So just finally now realizing my sovereignty and that it's okay because of who I am. I'm an extension of source. I'm
Yeah.
just as valuable. When you've been told you're unworthy and you're worthless and you're unclean as a woman because of your menstrual cycle and you know, you just want to shrink into a corner and go, don't look at me, don't listen to me, So to be able to finally speak up and also my husband now is such an encourager for
Mm,
me to use my voice. He wants to hear what I want. He wants to hear my desires
yeah.
because he wants to participate in helping me get them.
Right.
I
Right.
never knew that could be possible. So, in now being able to speak up, that kind of started me. Oh, well, maybe I can speak up in other areas. What about my business? Could I
Yeah.
speak up there? And then receiving messages from the many, they first started out as just written. And then I asked them, could I use my voice? And they're like, yes, let's use your voice. So, now getting to express their messages and even talk about this,
Yeah.
to have the freedom to be able to talk about this. So,
And so one of the things I notice is as you are using your voice, you're definitely much more expressive and
mhm.
your face just lights up and you become more animated. And so, how do you use your voice to help others at this point?
Mm. I always love that the many tell me to remind us all, speaking to the choir, remind all of us of our goodness.
Mm,
So, because I was taught of how not good I was, that I was innately sinful, that I was full of original sin and there's no way to get it out of you, instead of that, no, we're innately good. We
yeah.
are pure, positive goodness in the flesh because we are an extension of source energy, of God, of God spark, whatever you want to call your higher power. So, as that, being able now to speak with people and share even the message of the many. When I give an, a message to someone who's asked a question, I use my voice and allow them to use my voice through me
Mm,
and talk through me, so, or even just give a message of encouragement for that day
yeah.
when they want to give a message in the morning or whatever. And so just sharing that there's hope, that you
Yes.
don't have to stay there, that you can thrive, that you can be at peace and you can be joy because we are here to experience as much joy as possible. And if we're not, then we need to fine tune that until we tune into our own inner being.
And so I know who the many are because
Mhm.
of my interactions with you, but I'm not sure that all of your listeners do. So I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit about who the many are and how they support you in living this joyful life and helping others?
Yeah, the many are my spirit guides. I had already for a while been kind of writing what I was allowing um, my inner being, my soul to speak to me about, because I would have questions and I would just ask. And then I decided several years before, in 2015, I was meditating and doing some yoga and meditating afterwards. And the conversation in my head was, I love you. Just kind of loving on myself. I cherish you. And then the conversation went to, we love you. We cherish you. And I was like, who is we? So I put that on the shelf because I was scared and I didn't know what to do with it until like last year before, I guess, last year, that I said, okay, I want to know who we is.
Yeah.
And so I just allowed them to speak to me. And I started writing one day, and what I felt like was going to come an answer. And the first couple of letters were kind of like how I write, which is very straight up and down. And my hand started pulling real hard to the right. So I knew, okay, they're here. Somebody has taken over, and here's the message. And I just kept writing and writing, and it's been ever since. So then as I progressed, I was able to actually speak their message rather than having to write it. So they have just so encouraged me with, again, over and over again, goodness, you're just goodness in the flesh.
And so if I wanted to, or others, your listeners wanted to ask the many a question, or get guidance from the many, is that something that's possible? And if so, how would we go about doing that?
Absolutely. I offer two ways to get messages from the many. One is where you can actually ask a specific question. So it takes me a little more time to read through your question and get a feel for, as I tune into the many and to tune into your spirit. So that takes a little long, but that's called Ask the Many, and it's on my website. It's on the front page. I Ask the Many, but on that page is another option for you to just ask for a personal reading. You don't really have like a burning question, but you would like a reading. It's almost like you would go to someone for an oracle card reading.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be for something specific. You just want a good feeling card for the day. What encouragement can you receive? Or what lesson maybe can you learn? So I offer the second way, where you can just ask for a personal reading. And we actually just do that live on a Zoom call. So
Okay.
they'll get their answer right away. As soon as I tune into them, tune into their spirit. There's many gives the answer, and we're off and running in a conversation. So
And there's just one more question, and I was curious if one of your listeners has identified with what you've been talking about with religious trauma, and they want to, access your support and your guidance.
mhm.
How can they do that?
um, right now I am creating a dynamic, thriving spiritual community, and it will be member based. But until that is ready to go, I'm hoping to launch that later in June. Um, until that time, they can join my private dynamic, thriving spiritual community Facebook group. So we will, that's kind of new, so we're just going to start gathering members so that you can get some more information, and we'll have some classes even within that private group. But we just don't want peering public eyes.
Right.
So our
Right.
conversation is sacred and
Yes.
holy to us. So it's very private, and I want to keep it that way.
Yeah.
So that is a free Facebook group that they can
Okay.
absolutely join.
And again, through your website.
I don't think I even have the link on there. If they'll just
Okay.
go to Facebook under groups, it's just Dynamic Thriving. So at Dynamic Thriving
Okay.
is our address.
Well, Marianne, thank you so much for your continued vulnerability, your ability to really kind of show your listeners
Mhm.
a way forward, and a little peek into how you have been healing from your own religious trauma, and to know more about your journey and your shifts in your business. And again, thank you for providing me the opportunity to interview you.
I just thank you so much. I appreciate you for doing this and taking the time and creating these beautiful questions, because there's so much we could talk about on this subject. And I do want to let everyone know there will be a part 2, because we did not get finished with our questions. And I'm looking forward to delving in a little bit deeper on specific things that happen when we are suffering with religious trauma or indoctrinated beliefs trauma. So thank everyone. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate you. Please be sure to like, comment, or subscribe to this podcast, because it really helps my work go into the world and spread more joy and more hope for thriving. And as always, visit our website, maryannepack.com. Several of our offers are on that front page. So I really appreciate you, Lori, for coming. Would you have any insight or a little word of wisdom you would like to share with our audience?
I think that for me, it's being aware of just areas that we need to grow and the areas that we need to heal, and to be willing to be vulnerable and ask for the support.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to become who we are wanting to become with support.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm a huge proponent of coaching and the mentorship programs and things like that, because that should be something normal in our lives. Because, you have a little league coach for softball when you're a little bitty guy. Well, you don't take that same coach to college or
Right.
to the pros.
Right.
You progress with a coach all through your athletic career. So this is no different. We need coaches at every step of the way. So I definitely do highly recommend coaching, whether it's with me, with Lori, with anyone that you resonate with that your soul resonates with. So thank you again for coming. Thank you, Lori. And remember, everyone, you are joy looking for a way to express.